All right, my earlier video today was a bit of a dramatic rant, so I want to do something a little bit more fun in this video. Now, this was an article that popped up on my screen yesterday, just a reply from some random progressive on Twitter, 10 examples that prove white privilege exists in every aspect imaginable. And so I thought what we could do is I'm going to read this article and learn about all the ways in which I have white privilege and react to it. So before we get into it, guys, if you're new to my channel, I do content every single day during the work week. I take the weekends off around news, politics, culture, but really focusing in on critical race theory, social justice, fighting back against the woke menace that has invaded our culture. If you enjoy what I'm doing, please hit subscribe. If you think you're subscribed, just double check, turn on those notifications, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, let me know what you think. I really appreciate it, and it helps me grow the channel. All right, let's take a look at 10 examples that prove white privilege is a real thing. Let's see. Hang on, I'm just trying to find the start of the article. If you checked out Jose Antonio Vargas' documentary about white people, aptly titled White People, you'll know that many white people struggle to discuss race. Not that some of you needed a documentary to confirm this fact. Wrong! Most white people actually don't struggle to discuss race. There is absolutely zero empirical evidence that white people struggle to discuss race. The only evidence that exists are anti-racist trainers who come in with no evidence saying, white people have white fragility and that's why they can't talk about race. There's no evidence that white fragility is a real thing. If you have evidence, post it below. I'll take a look. Throw white privilege into the discussion and the awkwardness and defensiveness can multiply astronomically. What is white privilege? The reality that a white person's whiteness has come and continues to come from with an array of benefits and advantages not shared by many people of color. It doesn't mean that I, as a white person, don't struggle hard. I do. Or that I haven't suffered. Well, I have known struggle. But simply that I receive help, often unacknowledged assistance, because I am white. Okay, back up. The idea of white privilege comes from an essay written by Robin DiAngelo's predecessor, a woman named Peggy McIntosh, a bougie white lady. This was written in the late 1980s. It's an essay called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack that basically every psychology student ever has to study and respond to in college, but the examples now are kind of ridiculous because it's written in the late 80s, and obviously we are in a much different place now than when Peggy McIntosh originally wrote this essay. Now, the funny thing about this essay is that it actually has zero citations. This is Peggy McIntosh just making a list of her perceptions about how lucky she is as a bougie white lady and how underprivileged all these black people are. But she doesn't provide any actual evidence to back it up that it's a widespread thing that is just outside of her perception. So that's what we mean when we say white privilege. Or as I don't know how to pronounce this person's name. The person that created the Captain America that had Jordan Peterson as the villain. I believe I am white. I've yet to receive a DNA test, which led to a surprising result for a white supremacist who thought himself 100% white. Perhaps most indicative of the power and prevalence of white privilege is that, though people of color have been fighting racism since its invention, I thought race was a social construct. Why did it have to be invented? Those who are most associated with white privilege education tend to be white people. Tim Weiss, Robin DiAngelo, Paul Gorski, and of course Peggy McIntosh, the author of the 1989 article, White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And I understand why Peggy McIntosh's knapsack article continues to fill anti-racist syllabus 26 years later. Her list of privileges makes the concept readable and digestible. Heck, the success of everyday feminism is largely because of this listing format. For example, I am never asked to speak for all people of my racial group. I'm sorry, I'm actually told that I speak for all white people on a daily basis. So that's wrong. Or if my day, week, or year is going badly, I need not ask of each negative episode or situation whether it had racial overtones. Well, wrong. I actually do have to ask now because Coca-Cola told me to try to be less white as a way to keep a job. So that's also wrong. Taken together, Peggy McIntosh's list reveals a privilege she's never explicitly states, the privilege to feel normal. But how odd is it that white people are the ones who so often disproportionately get credit for educating about white privilege? I don't know, guys. Why do you buy their books? You know what could solve this entire problem? Stop buying the books of bougie white trainers who are basing their books on nothing but their own personal perception and experience. Just stop buying the books. It's really not that hard. Think of it this way. Because I have always had full use of my legs, I'd be the last person to learn about life in a wheelchair. In fact, navigating a tour of the state capitol with a student in a wheelchair for 30 minutes taught me more about life in a wheelchair than my previous 30 years taught me yet. When it comes to white privilege, white people have somehow become the authority. Then stop buying their books. No one would be happier than me if not a single person bought Robin DiAngelo's forthcoming book. Stop buying the books. Well, I have indeed learned important lessons from prominent white anti-racist educators. Like the above ability privilege analogy that I pulled from Tim Wise, here are some lessons people of color have taught me that have changed my life and that could change yours as well. Okay, here I'm about to learn all the reasons I have white privilege. 1, I have the privilege of having a positive relationship with the police generally. I somehow remember being tear gassed by the police on January 6th while I was standing on the Capitol lawn with a bunch of other people who weren't really doing anything. I also remember being at the Million MAGA March, the one in November. I wasn't there at the one in December, but I was there at the one in November after the election. And I remember that the police were sending white people to have the shit kicked out of them through Black Lives Matter Plaza and didn't do a dang thing to protect them. So no. Debunked, number 1. Sure, the police who patrolled the affluent neighborhoods of my youth were... The person who wrote this article is a bougie white person. I didn't grow up in affluent neighborhoods, man. I grew up in a small town in rural Vermont. There was no bougie affluent neighborhoods around me. Somehow it's always the bougie white people that are writing about this crap because they have nothing better to do. The police who patrolled the affluent neighborhoods of my youth were an inconvenience to a few keggers, and I maintain that a traffic violation from the late 90s was unfair, but I grew up thinking that the police officers as a source of safety if I was ever in danger. You know what another incident was? You remember that time I was chased down the street by Black Lives Matter with Brandon and some other walkaway folks, and Brandon called the police as it was happening, and they refused to come out and help us because the leader of that particular Black Lives Matter posse had a personal relationship with the police chief in Dallas. Yeah, I remember that too. In 1999, this person whose name I can't pronounce, and the 41 bullets that took police officers in plainclothes discharged at an unarmed black man with no criminal record taught me that not everyone shares this privilege. Diallo was for me what Michael Brown has been to some white people. Too many black and brown people are not safe with the police, not even if you're a child. Okay. Whatever. I'm not going to read all these things because I'm going to mispronounce all these people's names. I'm sorry. We've already debunked it anyway. Number 2, I have the privilege of being favored by school authorities. Kira Wilmot and Ahmed Mohammed, both of whom were arrested for bringing science projects to school while brown or black, helped teach me this lesson. Recently, a black 12-year-old was suspended for intimidating a white girl through his staring that took place during a staring contest. Okay, you want to talk about systemic racism? You want to know where there is actual systemic racism? An actual example of systemic racism is the fact that the Supreme Court in this country has ruled that Harvard can discriminate against Asian Americans. I thought that we were supposed to stop Asian hate. I thought that we were all on Team Asian American and we should be lifting this community up and they need our support and our love and our kindness and we need to stop Asian hate and all these things. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of the Ivy League schools actively discriminate against Asian Americans in their admissions process. Asian Americans are held to a higher standard than every other race, including pasty white girls like me. So, don't talk to me about systemic racism and being favored in schools when Asian Americans, one of your little oppressed communities, when it suits you, because they're also privileged when that suits you, must be really confusing. Don't talk to me about that when you actively discriminate against Asian Americans in an actual example of literal systemic racism. These articles are so easy. I don't even need to read the text. I can just read the headline. I have the privilege of attending segregated schools of affluence. Of affluence. That's true, even if I'm white and poor, a demographic rarely forced to live in concentrated poverty. Dude, I grew up and went to school. There are only 48 people in my high school graduating class. I had a very small school. A good portion of the, yes, white kids that I went to school with, because I lived in rural Vermont, one of the whitest of white states in the entire country, most of them lived in trailers. Many of them lived in actual trailers. There was no affluence. They lived on trailers. They lived on farms. That was where they lived. So don't lecture me about this. Like, not every white person lives in an affluent neighborhood that goes and has a bougie white school to attend to. If you did, great. And I'm sure Robin DiAngelo did. I'm sure Peggy McIntosh did. But, like, not everyone has that. I have the privilege of learning about my race in school. In response to white politicians' outrageous shutting down of Tucson Unified School District's Mexican American Studies program, a program that dramatically reduced educational disparities for Latinx students, a movement to increase ethnic studies is growing, winning victories in districts that are predominantly of color, such as Los Angeles Unified and more recently Oakland Unified. Okay, I have absolutely no problem, none whatsoever, with kids in school learning about multiple cultures. In fact, even in my crappy, small town high school, I learned about different cultures. It was called world fucking history. I have the privilege of finding children's books that overwhelmingly represent my race. Well, yeah, now white kids have the privilege of being introduced to literature with novels like Anti-Racist Baby. And the whitewashing of curriculum extends into bookstores, less so in libraries where I live. It's not because I'm a bad shopper, though I am. In a New York Times op-ed, Walter Dean Myers taught me that of 3,200 children's books published in 2013, just 93 were about Black people. And that doesn't mean the remaining 3,107 were filled with people of color of various races. I mean, I would imagine that some of those children's books actually were about fictional creatures like unicorns or other animals that had no people in them at all. In 2013, only 8% of children's books were written by or about people of color. On many trips to Seattle school bookstores, I could find, Seattle is so bougie. Why do these people who grow up in bougie white neighborhoods assume that what they experience is the same as what we all experience? I have the privilege of soaking in media blatantly biased towards my race. Dude. Have you turned on MSNBC lately? Because every other GD word is about racism. It truly is. Like, I used to, watch MSNBC just for fun, just to, see how much, crazy nonsense was. I can't do it anymore because every flipping word is about race. The same with CNN. Everyday Feminism writer deepened my understanding of this bias that rears its unwelcome, white-loving head, for example, in pictures that humanize white killers while simultaneously dehumanizing victims of color. Do you remember when Ali Velshi on MSNBC stood in front of a burning building in the Minneapolis riots after George Floyd's death a year ago today? Remember when Ali Velshi stood in front of a burning building and was like, "This is a mostly peaceful protest"? Yeah, okay. You got a couple of screenshots, which, you know what, to be honest with you, I actually agree with some of these grievances. I agree that frankly, white, especially when it comes to college kids, I'm sorry, I agree that some of the way this stuff is framed can sometimes be unfortunate, but a couple of screenshots is not indicative of a larger trend. It's just not. I have the privilege of escaping violent stereotypes associated with my race. Really? Because I am told that to be white is to be aggressive, is to be hateful, is to not be humble, is to not listen. I am told that being white is to be associated with every negative thing that has ever happened ever. I am told that to be white means that I am responsible for slavery, even though my ancestors came from France and founded Quebec and never owned slaves ever? Really? I don't have the privilege of not escaping my, the violent stereotypes associated with my race. Literally no white person has the ability to escape these ridiculous, made-up stereotypes by bougie white people like this. Number 8. I have the privilege of playing the colorblind card, wiping the slate clean of centuries of racism. Dude, okay. I've said this a million times. I think the colorblind approach is stupid. If there is a black person standing in front of me, most of the time, not all the time, because some black people have lighter skin, but most of the time I can look at a person and I know they're not white, they are black, or they are Latino, or they are Asian, or what have you. We are not actually colorblind in that sense, and that's why I hate this terminology. And I really hate that the right insists on using this terminology just because they're backlashing against the left, because the right isn't strategic at all in how they go about things or how they name things. They just do things that bother the left to prove that they can. It's so stupid. I would prefer if people stopped saying colorblind entirely. However, that's not what they mean. And these people are not acting in good faith, and they downright know. They downright know that's not what they mean. They mean, when they say colorblind, it's not that you don't see color, it's not that you don't see race, it means that you don't treat people differently. And on this point, I am 100% on board. We should not be treating people differently because of their race. We should not be making broad generalizations or stereotypes about people because of their race. This is what was taught to me in elementary school. I don't know why this is such an absurd concept or why we're getting away from it. Nonetheless, white people have been using the invention of race through policy and legislation to systematically benefit white people from early on as the colonial era. And when overt racism finally became socially unacceptable after, of course, vast inequality that has been deeply entrenched in every aspect of the political, social, and economic life, we switched to colorblindness, making it virtually impossible to address this social inequality. So what he's saying here is Martin Luther King didn't go far enough in addressing equality. He should have demanded revenge. That's really what they're asking for. They're not asking for equality. They're not asking for equity. They're asking for revenge. That's what it is. Listen, a lot of wrongs have been done in the past, and those were horrible. And we should work our very best to never repeat the mistakes of the past. We have to learn from them and grow and move forward and make literal progress. However, seeking revenge because of things that happened in the past, whether it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that is not actually going to create a more fair and just and equal society. It's just putting things in the opposite direction. You do not fight racism by creating more racism. 9. We're almost there, guys. I have the privilege of being insulated from the daily toll of racism. I think about race all day, every day, even on my days off. It has very literally driven me to madness. So no, I do not accept that, no. I have the privilege of living ignorant of the dire state of racism today. Oh, he identified Sean King! Yes, Sean King, the epitome of what it means to be black in America. Listen, I need you to understand that what I'm about to say, this is what I taught students at Morehouse last week. 2015 is not what we thought it was about. The deadliest hate crime against black folks in the past 75 years. This happened this year in Charleston. More unarmed black folks have been killed by police this year. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, Sean King saying stuff that has nothing to do with reality. And it's not proof. Dude, Sean King posting something on Facebook is not proof that we are living in a state, in a time that racism is in a dire state. So no, I have not been convinced I have white privilege. Have any of you been convinced that this is a real thing? Listen, and again, I will be the first to acknowledge that I actually think there are nuggets of truth. This is why this ideology is so dangerous. There are like nuggets of truth in there that I'm like, yeah, I can wrap my head around that. But then they take it and they just keep going and they keep going and they keep going and they take it too far. And at some point it becomes something that is just like, it makes no godly sense within the reality that a lot of people are living, and they don't want to listen. They don't want to understand. They aren't thinking about what they're doing. They're not thinking about the end goal. What they're thinking about is getting clicks from white people who feel guilty about being white so that they can make money. This is how the media has chosen to make money, is by pissing off bougie, privileged white people and taking advantage of their white guilt and turning them on flicking all of us. They're being used as useful idiots. It's really that simple. All right, guys, that's all I have. I don't know. What do you think about these? Do you feel like you have white privilege now that you've watched this video and you've gone through the list of examples? I'll link this article in the description below if you want to read it for yourself.